Sandra was fighting for her life in room 14, unaware that her best friend had already moved into her master bedroom. For 11 days her husband Marcus played the grieving spouse, until he stopped showing up. What he didn't know: hospitals hear everything. Nurses talk. Secrets travel faster than sickness. Sandra wasn't just recovering. She was counting. For 30 days she played the perfect dying wife. Most people scream when they discover betrayal. Sandra became silent. And on the day she came home, she didn't bring accusations. She brought a folder. The question was never whether Marcus had betrayed her. The question was how much Sandra already knew. Before we continue, please like this video and subscribe. Also tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? New York? London? Lagos? Maybe anywhere in the world. We'd love to know. Sandra and Marcus Cole had been married for 9 years. They lived in a clean, modern apartment on the 14th floor of a building in the center of the city, the kind of building with a concierge, a gym, and a rooftop garden that nobody ever used. They had chosen it together when Marcus's consulting firm finally began turning a real profit. Sandra had pointed at the view of the river and said, "This one." And Marcus had agreed without hesitation. Sandra worked as a hospital administrator, a career that required patience, precision, and an ability to manage chaos without letting it show on her face. She was good at her job. She was good at most things she committed to. She was the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday, who showed up early, stayed late without being asked, and noticed when someone in the room was struggling before they knew it themselves. Marcus was charming in the way that some men are charming, effortlessly, selectively, and most powerfully in rooms full of people he wanted to impress. He was tall, well-dressed, and spoke with the kind of quiet confidence that made clients trust him immediately. At home he was quieter, more distracted. Sandra had learned to read the distance in his eyes as tiredness, had learned to fill the silences herself, had learned to need less than she actually needed. Diane Osei had been Sandra's closest friend since university. 15 years of friendship, through 2 cities, 3 jobs, 1 broken engagement on Diane's part, and the slow, difficult years of Sandra and Marcus's marriage that nobody talked about openly. Diane was funny and warm, the kind of person who arrived at your door with food when you were struggling before you had even told anyone you were struggling. Sandra trusted her completely, loved her like a sister, had told her things she had never told Marcus. The 3 of them had dinner together at least once a month. Marcus liked Diane, called her one of the good ones, said Sandra was lucky to have a friend like that. In the months before Sandra's collapse, there were signs she noticed but did not fully read. Marcus coming home later, his phone always face down on the table. Diane becoming less available than usual, always busy, always another reason she could not meet. Sandra had filed these things away quietly and told herself she was imagining them. She had always been good at talking herself out of what she already knew. The collapse had come on a Tuesday. Sandra was at her desk at work when she felt the room tilt sideways and could not correct it. Her colleague found her on the floor beside her chair. The ambulance arrived in 8 minutes. By the time Marcus reached the hospital, she was already stable, but frightened, confused, and asking for water in a voice that did not sound like her own. The diagnosis was severe cardiac arrhythmia, an electrical malfunction in the heart that had been building quietly for years. Undetected. Waiting. The doctor said she needed at least 4 to 6 weeks of hospital observation, rest, and medication adjustment. They said she was lucky she had not been alone when it happened. They said she needed to reduce stress significantly. Marcus nodded at everything the doctor said. He signed the forms, answered the insurance questions. He was efficient, present, and everything a husband should be in a crisis. He sat with Sandra that first evening until visiting hours ended. He promised to return the next morning. He did not return the next morning. He called instead. Said a client emergency had pulled him away. Said he would come that evening. He did not come that evening either. At 10 p.m. he sent a text that said, "Sorry love. Long day. How are you feeling? Rest well." Sandra read it 3 times in the blue light of the hospital room. Then typed back, "I'm okay. Miss you." He did not reply. On day 3 Sandra called Diane. Asked her to check on Marcus at the apartment, bring him food if he needed it, make sure he was eating. Diane said of course. Said she would go that same afternoon. Sandra thanked her and felt immediately better. Because that was what Diane was for. That was what 15 years of friendship looked like. Reliable, present, unconditional. What Sandra did not know was that Diane had already been to the apartment twice since the hospitalization. Not to drop food off. To stay. The first visit had lasted the whole night. And by day 4, Diane had a key, Marcus's spare, and had brought a bag. The neighbors on the 14th floor noticed. The concierge noticed. The woman in apartment 14C, who always walked her dog at 7 a.m., noticed too. She saw a different woman leaving with Marcus in the mornings and said nothing, because it was not her business. And people in this city had learned not to make things their business. Nobody called Sandra. Sandra lay in her hospital bed calling Marcus and getting voicemail, calling Diane and getting short replies, telling herself there were explanations, telling herself she was being paranoid, telling herself that sick people imagine things. She was very good at telling herself things. It was Sandra's colleague Janet who told her. Janet was not trying to be cruel. She was trying to prevent Sandra from being the last person to know, which she believed was a greater cruelty. She came to the hospital on day 11 during her lunch break, sat beside Sandra's bed, and took a long time to start speaking. She had seen them. At the restaurant on Clement Street, the one Sandra and Marcus went to on anniversaries. Janet had been there with her husband for a birthday dinner. Marcus and Diane were at the corner table. Not talking like friends. Sitting the way people sit when they have stopped pretending to be something other than what they are. Sandra listened to all of it without moving. She did not cry. Did not reach for Janet's hand. Did not ask her to stop or tell her she was wrong. She simply listened with the same expression she used in difficult administrative meetings. Very still, very focused, absorbing everything and showing nothing. When Janet finished speaking, Sandra thanked her quietly. Asked her to close the door on her way out. Then she lay in the same bed she had been lying in for 11 days, the bed she had been lying in while her husband moved her best friend into their shared home, and looked at the ceiling for a very long time. She did not call Marcus. She did not call Diane. She called her younger sister Ruth, who lived 2 hours away, and asked her to come. Ruth arrived that evening with a bag and a face that said she had suspected something for longer than she was prepared to admit. That night, Ruth told Sandra what she had heard through a mutual friend. That Diane had been seen at the apartment multiple times. That Marcus had taken Diane to a work event the previous weekend and introduced her to colleagues. That the whole thing carried the casual confidence of people who believed they were never going to be caught, because the person most affected was trapped in a hospital bed and had no way of finding out. Sandra did not sleep that night. Not from pain. From clarity. For the first time in 11 days, possibly for the first time in years, she could see everything without the comfortable distortion of trust. The hardest part was not the betrayal itself. The hardest part was the inventory. Lying in that hospital bed in the days that followed, Sandra went through everything. Not with anger, anger came later. First came the accounting. The full, honest accounting of what she had ignored, excused, and explained away over the years because she had loved Marcus, trusted Diane, and believed the life she had built was real. The late nights she had accepted without question. The weekends Marcus spent away for work that now arranged themselves differently in her memory. The times Diane had been unavailable, always for reasons that made sense individually, but now forming a pattern she could no longer unsee. The dinners where something sat between the three of them that she had mistaken for tiredness. The moments where Diane had known things about Marcus that Sandra had never told her. She thought about the woman she had become in this marriage. How much she had shrunk herself to fit the space Marcus required. How she had stopped asking for things because asking felt like pressure, and she had not wanted to be pressure. How she had poured herself into her work, friendships, and routines and called it a full life because it was easier than admitting the center of it was hollow. The machines beside her bed continued their steady rhythm. The nurses came and went with quiet professionalism. Ruth slept in the chair beside her some nights, brought proper food during the day, and did not push Sandra to talk more than she wanted to. Outside the hospital window, the city continued its ordinary life, traffic, weather, people going places, entirely indifferent to the woman in room 14 who was being quietly rebuilt by the hardest knowledge she had ever received. Ruth was 5 years younger than Sandra and had always been the fiercer of the two. Where Sandra processed things slowly and carefully, Ruth moved fast, all instinct, directness, and an absolute intolerance for being treated with less than full dignity. She had never fully trusted Marcus. She had said so once, early in the marriage, and Sandra had asked her gently to let it go. Ruth had let it go and never raised it again. But she had never forgotten it either. On the 4th night of her hospital stay, when Sandra was finally ready to talk, Ruth sat in the chair beside the bed and listened to everything. She did not interrupt. Did not react dramatically. She simply listened the way their mother had taught both of them to listen, with her whole body quietly making space. When Sandra finished, Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You have two choices. You can be broken by this. Or you can be clarified by it. Both are real options. Only one serves you." Then she said, "You are not in a weak position. You are in a hospital bed recovering from a serious illness. Every decision you make right now needs to be made from that recovery, not from the pain. Anger is energy. Use it when you are stronger." Then she said, "Do not call him yet. Do not let either of them know what you know. Knowledge is advantage. The moment you speak it, you lose the advantage. So for now, no. Be quiet. And get well." Sandra looked at her sister for a long time. Then she nodded once, asked Ruth to pass her water, drank it slowly and began the process of getting well. She had 12 more days in that hospital. She used every one of them. Sandra had spent 9 years as a hospital administrator. She understood systems, documentation, paper trails, the importance of records, and the way institutions protected people who knew how to use them properly. These were not skills she had ever imagined applying to her own marriage. But Sandra was a practical woman, and the situation required practicality. Ruth brought her laptop to the hospital on day 14. Sandra began making calls quietly and methodically from her hospital bed. She called a lawyer, a woman named Clara Mensa who had been recommended by a colleague years earlier for reasons Sandra had filed away without expecting to use. Clara came to the hospital. They spoke for 2 hours and Clara left with a list of information she needed Sandra to gather. Sandra also called her bank. She asked quiet questions about joint accounts, individual accounts, and what documentation was required for different processes. She asked the questions in the neutral professional tone she used at work, the tone that implied she was asking on behalf of someone else, that this was routine, that nothing emotional was happening here at all. She called her employer, spoke with HR, asked about her employment benefits, her individual health coverage, and what would happen to her insurance in different life circumstances. All routine questions, all devastating in their implications. She did not confront Marcus. He called twice during this period and she answered both times, speaking warmly, asking about the apartment, saying she was improving steadily, asking when he thought he might visit. He said soon. He said things were busy. Sandra said she understood. She told him she loved him. He said it back. Then she hung up and continued making her list. Diane sent a voice note on day 16 asking how Sandra was feeling. Sandra listened to it once. Then she replied with a voice note of her own, warm, slightly tired sounding, grateful. She was very good at this. She had been practicing her whole life without knowing it. Marcus came to collect Sandra from the hospital on the morning of her discharge. He arrived on time, which she noted. He brought flowers, not lilies this time but roses, which she also noted. He kissed her cheek and spoke to the nurses with the easy charm that had once made Sandra proud to be with him and now read simply as information about who he was. He helped her into the car. He drove carefully. He asked how she was feeling every few minutes, as though the question itself was proof of care. Sandra answered each time, "Better, much better, just tired," and watched the city pass outside the window while thinking about nothing in particular. When they arrived at the apartment building, the concierge held the door. His eyes met Sandra's for half a second, then moved away too quickly. She noted that too. The apartment was clean. Noticeably clean. The kind of clean that happens when someone has prepared a space to look like it had only ever been used by the people who were supposed to use it. Sandra walked through each room slowly under the pretense of reacquainting herself with being home. She opened the wardrobe in the guest room. Empty. She opened the bathroom cabinet. Reorganized. Then she ran her finger along the shelf above the window in the living room where she always kept 3 specific books in a specific order. They had been moved and replaced incorrectly. She said nothing. Marcus made lunch. He was a good cook when he wanted to be, another thing Sandra had once loved about him and now simply observed. They ate together at the kitchen table while he talked about work and she listened, asking appropriate questions at appropriate moments. From the outside, everything looked exactly like a husband caring for a wife who had just come home from the hospital. That evening Ruth arrived to stay for the week. Marcus greeted her with a smile. Ruth smiled back. Later, in the kitchen while Marcus was in the other room, Ruth looked at Sandra and Sandra looked at Ruth and no words were necessary. Sandra gave herself 30 days. 30 days to recover fully. 30 days to gather everything Clara needed. 30 days to quietly move the things that needed to be moved into the right positions without announcement or emotion. 30 days to be a wife who had come home from the hospital grateful, tired, and focused on getting well while doing the most focused and deliberate work of her entire life in the spaces Marcus could not see. Clara had been thorough. The financial picture of the marriage was complicated in the way 9 years of shared life always is. Joint accounts, shared property, a mortgage in both names, and assets listed together that had originally come from Sandra's salary during the years Marcus's business had not yet become profitable. Clara documented all of it. The paperwork was significant, and the picture it created was very clear. Sandra also spoke to 2 colleagues who had seen Marcus and Diane at the restaurant. Both were willing to provide written statements. She spoke to the concierge too, carefully, professionally, without pressure, and he confirmed what she already knew without using words that could not be taken back. She did not tell Marcus any of this. She continued to be warm, recovering, and present. She cooked dinner twice a week, asked about his clients, laughed at his jokes. By every visible measure, she was simply a wife returning to her normal life. On the 28th day, Sandra called Diane. Not to confront her, but to invite her to lunch. Diane accepted immediately, eagerly, Sandra thought, with the slightly overwrought warmth of someone who had been feeling guilty and was relieved to be forgiven. They met at a cafe near the hospital. Diane was dressed carefully. She hugged Sandra too long. Then she said, "I'm so glad you're better. I've been so worried. I'm so sorry I wasn't there more." Sandra smiled and said, "It's fine. You were probably taking care of things at my apartment. Just that. Nothing more." Then she watched Diane's face. Diane's expression lasted less than 2 seconds before she recovered it. But Sandra was a woman who had spent 30 days watching carefully. 2 seconds was more than enough. She drove home from that lunch and sat in her car in the parking garage for 10 minutes. Not crying. Not angry. Simply very, very ready. Sandra had chosen a Saturday. Marcus always worked from home on Saturdays. Client calls in the morning, paperwork in the afternoon, dinner in the evening. A predictable, comfortable Saturday in their predictable, comfortable life. Clara arrived at 10 a.m. Marcus was on a client call in the study. He came out 20 minutes later to find his wife sitting at the kitchen table across from a woman he did not recognize, with a folder open between them and an expression on Sandra's face that he had never seen before and would not easily forget. Sandra said, "Marcus, this is my lawyer, Clara Mensa. Please sit down." He did not sit immediately. He stood in the kitchen doorway in his weekend clothes, looking from Sandra to Clara and back to Sandra. Something in his expression shifted, a recalibration happening behind his eyes, a rapid assessment of what this meant, how bad it was, and whether there was still a version of this situation he could manage. There was not. Clara walked him through the documentation efficiently and without drama. The financial records. The account movements during the period of Sandra's hospitalization, including 2 restaurant charges and a hotel stay that aligned precisely with dates Marcus had cited as work obligations. The statements from witnesses. The confirmation from the building concierge. Each document was placed in front of him quietly, in order, with enough time to read and understand before the next one followed. Marcus said very little during this. He started 2 sentences and did not finish either of them. He looked at Sandra twice, with an expression that moved through several things rapidly, none of them useful, and Sandra looked back at him with the same calm she had been practicing for 30 days. When Clara finished, Sandra spoke for the first time in 40 minutes. She said, "I don't need you to explain. I don't want a conversation about this. I want you to understand that I know everything, that my lawyer has everything, and that from this point forward all communication between us goes through Clara." Then she stood up, picked up her bag and walked to the door of the apartment she had chosen 9 years earlier because of the view of the river. She stopped at the door and turned back once. Not to say something dramatic. Not to give him a final word to carry. She simply looked at the apartment, at the clean lines of the life she had built, furnished and maintained, and then she looked at Marcus one last time. She said the lilies were a nice touch. On day 1. Then she walked out. Ruth was waiting in the car downstairs. Marcus sat at the kitchen table alone for a very long time. Clara let herself out. The legal process took 7 months. Clara was meticulous, Sandra was patient, and the outcome reflected both. The apartment, which the mortgage records showed had been largely funded by Sandra's salary during the early years, was sold. Sandra received the larger share. The joint accounts were divided according to documented contributions. Marcus's attempts to dispute several items were unsuccessful. Marcus and Diane's relationship did not survive the exposure. This was not Sandra's doing. She had not contacted Diane after that lunch, had not sent messages, and had not said anything to mutual friends. But the architecture of a relationship built on deception rarely survives the removal of the deception. Without the secret holding it together, without the tension, the risk, and the borrowed intimacy of a situation that belonged to someone else, what remained between Marcus and Diane turned out to be considerably less than either of them had imagined. They separated 4 months after Sandra filed. Sandra heard this through Ruth, who heard it through a mutual friend, and Sandra's only response was a single nod before returning to whatever she had been doing. Sandra returned to her job. Her colleagues were careful with her at first, the particular carefulness of people who know something painful has happened and are trying to show support without making it more present than it needs to be. She appreciated the care and did not require it for very long. She was good at her job. She had always been good at her job. The work was steady, real, and required exactly the kind of focused, patient attention she had spent 30 days redirecting into something else. She moved into a smaller apartment on the other side of the city. No river view. A different kind of quiet. She arranged it slowly, choosing each thing deliberately. No concierge. A kitchen with good light. A bookshelf she organized herself in an order she chose and no one would ever rearrange. She did not hear from Diane. She did not reach out either. Some things do not require a final conversation. Some endings are complete without a final word, and the silence itself says everything dignity requires. Sandra Cole was not a woman who had never been broken. She was a woman who had learned, in the most difficult way at the most vulnerable moment of her life, that being broken and being defeated are not the same thing. She did not hate Marcus. She did not hate Diane. She simply moved forward. Ask yourself this: who in your life do you trust completely? And have you ever considered what they might do if they believed you could not see? I hope you enjoyed watching this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. Like, share, and comment on the lessons you've learned. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. See you in my next video.